Well, despite obvious diminishing interest in Netflix's abysmal Resident Evil show. I've already made it this far, so we might as well finish this thing. Hopefully you guys are still entertained by this. I can tell you that the last few episodes are both shockingly bad, but also kind of amusing in a so bad it's good kind of way. You'll notice I've also stopped using B-roll from Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I'm now using it from Dragon's Dogma, so this video can function as sort of a game recommendation. It's also made by Capcom, so if you like Monster Hunter and action RPGs, you'll love the game. It's finally getting a sequel after 10 years, so I would highly recommend checking it out. So without further ado, let's finish this giant piece of shit. I'm going to operate on the same rules as last time and just combine the past scenes and future scenes instead of constantly swapping between them like the show does to save time and to make this more coherent. Episode 6 is basically the polar opposite of the last episode. Instead of being primarily in the past, it is primarily in the future, and unfortunately, for the worst. The episode does begin with one past scene with Wesker telling Evelyn that he learned nothing from torturing Angel or Angal, the conspiracy theory guy, and tells her that he's going to inject him with a truth serum concoction containing joy. Instead, conspiracy theory guy tells him that nobody else knows about his daughter's immunity to the zombie virus, and so he injects him with a fully lethal dose of joy. Of course, Evelyn suspects Wesker is the mole within Umbrella, and he tells her to fuck off and gets taken into custody. Then we swap to the future plot for the majority of the rest of the episode. Jade is taken somewhere, and Billy tells her that she was sent by Evelyn to capture her. We learn that Wesker is dead, which I doubt given that we were lied to about Billy already, and the twins haven't seen each other in years. Jade, of course, says she'll never join Umbrella, and Billy confesses that she fucked up and chose the wrong side. The zombie virus is slowly turning her 14 years later. I'm not really sure what they're trying to go for here. Maybe it's like a Wolverine healing factor and she's finally reached her old man Logan stage, and so the virus is slowly killing her after she's fought it off consistently since a teenager. Does it really matter? Not really. And then she removes Jade's tracker, which was implanted when they took her blood, and frees her. Jade punches her sister in the face to make it look like she escaped, and grabs the Queen's zombie head and escapes the compound. She's then found by her friends at the university, which up until this point I didn't even know the university was referring to their rebel base. And it turns out that the university is a big ship in the middle of the ocean. And of course waiting for her is Arjun, which is her husband, I guess, and B, her daughter. The only reason I'm saying their names is because it makes it less confusing for later, trust me. Also as a side note, I'm surprised I'm just noticing this now, but Jade's actress is tall as fuck. And God, I must have some kind of face blindness, because apparently as I'm looking this up, she's also the main character of Forspoken, which you better believe I'll be covering when it comes out. And apparently her height is 5'11 and a quarter, so either she's wearing lifts in all these scenes, or every actor is a manlet. Not a single 6 foot or taller man was cast for this show. Seriously, if you just go back to any of the scenes prior, she's taller than the man in every single scene. Which if you ask me, and people are probably going to call me a conspiracy theorist for this, or a misogynist or something, but they clearly did this on purpose to reverse the gender roles. You'll notice, and many other people have already commented on previous videos and noticed this, that all of the men are completely fucking useless, and the women get everything done in this show, much like many other Netflix shows if you've seen them. And speaking of conspiracy theories, in the next scene you'll notice a lot of subliminal messaging here. One, as I brought up in episode 1, we have mixed race couples. Their daughter B is a child prodigy. We're told she's a super genius, just like Jade, by the way, even though it is never reflected in dialogue or actions other than her playing a piano in a scene after this. And I suspect this is partially because unless you yourself are an intelligent person, it is very difficult to write intelligent characters, because midwits or even lower intelligence people don't understand what actually makes somebody smart. It has nothing to do with memorizing facts or practicing for thousands of hours at a skill. But whatever, I've derailed enough. Continuing on with the political messaging, Jade is clearly the man in this relationship wearing the pants. Again, 1, being taller, 2, doing everything in the plot. Arjun is clearly just an emotional tampon, and, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets pegged. And we also learn he's not B's father, so he's a cuck as well on top of everything else. As to what actually happens in this scene, Jade talks about wanting to find a way to control the zombies, but Arjun wants her to actually be a mother and raise her daughter, which makes sense to a degree, especially if she's constantly risking her life on her own. And we now know that the Wesker blood is not completely immune to the zombie virus, which actually ups the stakes a bit. Then we get some generic drama scenes after this, with Arjun talking to B in the cafeteria about her mother. Then there's a romance moment between Jade and Arjun, and Jade talks about wishing she'd killed her sister. Then we see that the ship passes over some underwater zombies that are somehow still alive. If the zombies are not undead, how the hell are they surviving underwater? They're supposed to still be alive, but they clearly don't need oxygen to exist. And because they're not undead, I guess the water isn't slowly dissolving their brain. It's just stupid, no matter how you look at it, but whatever, just accept it, move on. Trust me, it's one of the least dumb things that happens in these last few episodes. Then in the next scene, we see that the only scientists on the ship are both women. This new girl is pregnant, and also, it's never explained to us when Jade became a scientist. We're told that the girls were smart in school when they were 14, but also, given the fact I've seen all 3 episodes at the time of recording this, it doesn't make sense when she would have become a scientist. Did she learn it during the apocalypse? Once again, the show just expects us to accept things. And I'm trying not to drag this out too far, but you'll see in a following episode that it makes even less sense that she's a genius scientist, knowing more about how she and her sister were bioengineered by Wesker. And yet another thing that adds to the long list of degeneracy in this show.
Have you ever been peed on before?
Once. College.
I'm glad Netflix is encouraging more women to be pissed on. That's great. Are we allowed to call the writers incels now? Anyway, the girls figure out that the queen zombie controls the others with some gland mutation, and they want to synthesize one with saliva. Apparently, they fail 55 times before Jade finally decides, well, I'm just gonna spit in a petri dish to try and bind the bacteria to it or whatever the hell they're doing. And it just works. Then we get the pointless scene showing B is insanely good at piano at 10 years old, the only time she shows any sort of intelligence or competence. And then Jade has to rush back to the lab because the pregnant chick calls her back. Apparently, the shit worked. They end up making 2 different types of enzymes, one which attracts zombies and one which repels zombies, which obviously would be extremely useful. Now, unfortunately, they need to test it out. But Jade, being an absolute fucking retard, can't wait to get permission or just leave the boat and test it off land on her own. No, she takes one of the fucking lifeboats, fishes out a zombie from underwater, which immediately comes back to life, obviously. We're also told, apparently, that the cold slows the zombies down and makes them hibernate. And she somehow injects the zombie with some sedative or something, and it actually works. And she takes the fucking zombie on board the university, takes it to her lab, which wouldn't be cold, so obviously the zombie's going to reactivate. Then she ties it up with fucking leather straps, weak-ass leather straps. And then, of course, even though it's supposed to be early morning, her daughter just happens to show up in the lab. And Jade, oh my god, man, she's so fucking dumb in this scene. It's mind-blowing. She decides to have her daughter just stand on the opposite end of the room from the zombie within sight. Then she gives a stupidly hopeful monologue that obviously is foreshadowing for what horrible things are about to happen. The writing for the show is so awful, dude. Then she coats herself in the enzyme, it works, the zombie ignores her like she's not even there. But then the zombie, of course, sees her daughter, breaks free from the fucking straps immediately and bolts toward her. Her daughter escapes the room, Jade gets fucking thrown off, and this is a female zombie, by the way, so I guess zombies are just given super strength by the T-virus too, because it throws her off like she's fucking nothing. Then it chases B down the hall, makes it to some kind of cargo area or something. B hides behind something, and of course the pregnant woman is there, and the zombie bites her and kills her. Then some bald black woman shoots the zombie, and Jade arrives, admits it's her fault immediately, doesn't even try and hide it. And of course, the pregnant chick's husband or boyfriend or whatever tries to kill her. Arjun saves her, kind of. And the dude just gives up after that, by the way. His wife just died in front of him. He feebly tries to shoot her, fails, and then does nothing. Doesn't even tackle her or attack her or anything. Sure, whatever, okay. The captain shows up on the scene, who I had thought first was a white guy, and I'm like, oh look, the one white man in this episode. No, he's not white. There literally is not a single white guy on the boat, and you can't fucking tell me that's not intentional. And then, of course, Umbrella shows up immediately afterward, and of course we're left wondering, how did they find him? And then the last scene of the episode is in the past again. We see the conspiracy theory guy become a zombie, and then Wesker, locked up in a cell, starts talking to himself, and we're left to wonder if it's like a clone or if he's hallucinating or something. And then the episode ends. Holy shit, that episode sucked. It's funny because in the last video, every episode was slightly better than the last, and now we've plummeted back to episode 1 territory again. The scene with the zombie is some of the most forced shit I've seen in recent memory. They just needed something bad to happen. For some reason, honestly, I don't even know how that serves the plot at all. We just got to know this pregnant woman. And Jade has already done plenty of questionable shit by this point. So just making her look like a retard doesn't serve anything. It almost feels like self-sabotage by the writers. Jade constantly does stupid things, but we're told she's some kind of super genius, ultra capable action hero character who's good at everything, except she only makes stupid decisions. It makes no sense. I don't even know what to give this episode. It's like a 2 or a 3 or something. Doesn't even matter. Let's just fucking move on to episode 7. So episode 7 begins in the past in 2005 in the Arklay Mountains, which you're already going to see a problem with this. I think technically this doesn't conflict with any lore since it would be taking place during Resident Evil 4 or around that time. So I suppose Wesker could be in some other secret Umbrella laboratory that happens to be by the Spencer Mansion. And we see that there's a whole bunch of Wesker clones, and they all have different personalities. And now we finally see the real Wesker dressed up in his Resident Evil 5 outfit. But Lance Reddick wearing the whole getup looks more like Blade than Wesker. It just kind of looks off in some way that's hard to describe. And apparently he's using the Wesker clones to research something at this secret lab, as he's not working with Umbrella anymore. And then some of the Umbrella Special Forces guys that look like Hunk show up, and Wesker kills one of his own clones immediately to cover up some evidence, I guess. He shows off some of his superpowers, and he escapes out of there, leaving 2 of the clones behind. And then Evelyn shows up, which explains how she ended up with these Wesker clones, and the Wesker we've known this whole time is one of those clones. Now back to 2022, we see our Wesker talking to this clone Wesker whose name is Bert, and it turns out he's been locked up for 17 years and hasn't seen the other Wesker in all this time. And this whole scene is basically just to show off Lance Reddick's acting chops. And yeah, I mean, he's a good actor. It's certainly one of the only saving graces of these past scenes. So our Wesker tells Bert that he has a family now, 2 daughters, and he's been out living his life while this Wesker has been locked up. Then in the next scene, we see Evelyn interrogating our Wesker, and we find out that Bert created this Super Joy with the mind control capabilities, and that's what he's been doing for the past 17 years, just working on Umbrella projects in secret. Then it cuts back to Bert, and we see that he kills 2 guards and escapes, clearly wanting to meet Wesker's family. Then we get a pointless scene with the girls where Jade is ghosting the hacker dude after all this time, after everything he's done for them, they're ghosting him. That's great. And we get yet another scene of Evelyn being a generic, crazy, irredeemable villain. Then we see Hacker Guy confronting the girls about being ghosted, and conveniently Bert shows up to pick up the girls from school, so they avoid him further, and of course now we get some goofy antics for the rest of this episode where Bert doesn't know how to act like a human being because he's never gotten a chance to be a human. Then we see Evelyn talking to R. Wesker again, explaining to the audience why Wesker injects his daughter's blood. All of the original Albert Wesker's clones were a failure in some way, which is why Umbrella abandoned the cloning program. And it gave this Wesker some kind of disease that makes him seizure every once in a while, so he bioengineered his daughters to have blood compatible with his own that he could inject to temporarily cure this disease. Then we get a really goofy scene at Olive Garden that feels really out of place in this series and more belongs in some kind of 90s comedy.
Umbrella, were they listening?
Oh my God. Unlimited breadsticks. Are you seeing this?
And the girls are freaked the fuck out, can't figure out what's going on. And eventually he explains he's a clone, their dad is a clone, and also that Resident Evil 5 did in fact happen. He directly references the volcano. Then, as the girls are super freaked out, he gives a speech how, despite the fact that they came from a super evil person, everyone in life has a choice and they can choose to be a good person. And it's actually decently well written, but because both of the girls are fucking bitches, they tell him to stay the fuck away from them or they'll scream. And then immediately after this, Umbrella shows up, so suddenly they need his help. They try and escape out the back. Bert shows off he has a bit of the original Wesker's powers, but not enough to defeat this random bodyguard guy who's a badass for no reason. And so him and the girls get captured. Meanwhile, while this whole thing was going on, Hacker Guy discovers that Evelyn has been drugging his mother with a pill, which of course is the experimental Super Joy. Then in the next scene, the girls are brought into the lab where Wesker is having a seizure. Evelyn forcibly takes their blood, and then she explains exactly what I inferred earlier about them being engineered to cure him. Then Billy freaks out.
I hope you fucking die.
And the two leave the room. And that's the end of the past plot this episode. Honestly, it was just okay. I think Bert saved this from being really boring or annoying. Unfortunately, the future plot goes completely off the rails. So at the start of this plot, we get an explanation for how Umbrella arrived last episode, that Billy slipped a tracker into the zombie queen's head that somehow they didn't find earlier when they were basically performing an autopsy last episode, so figure that one out. And for whatever reason that isn't really explained, Umbrella hasn't captured or killed anyone on board yet, even though I'm sure that would be relatively easy. Then Arjun shows up and tries to console her, and Vito is pressing the button, whatever that means. And this is the part where I admit I kind of fucked up something from a few episodes ago. I said I didn't remember whether or not they said Evelyn's last name. Well, it turns out her last name is Marcus, which if you're a Resident Evil fan, you would have instantly made the connection to James Marcus. Well, here's the thing. I fucking hated Resident Evil 0. I think it's easily the worst of the classic style of fixed camera tank controls Resident Evil games. So yeah, I pretty much forgot most of the plot, so that's my bad. I know they did say her last name before, and they say it again in this scene. Then in the next scene, we see the boat captain, whose name is Sakim. Again, no white men in this show anymore. Negotiates with Evelyn, threatens her with data back from 2022 that apparently they got from some hard drive or something. It's never explained in the rest of this show, so maybe it's a plot line that's going to be explained in Season 2, which I hope to God this doesn't fucking get a Season 2, but it's Netflix, so it's basically guaranteed. But Evelyn doesn't give a shit about any of this, and threatens to kill everyone to get Jade. So here's the question here. I have two main important questions. One, why didn't she already do that when there was 3 fucking helicopters above the boat last episode? As far as we know, the university is not well armed. This entire plot is pointless and just to drag out this series for another episode. And the second question, and possibly even more important, is why is Jade even important? Who gives a fuck, right? Well, they do have an answer for that, and you'll see soon. Then we see that Jade is talking to Bee and tells her that when shit hits the fan, to grab Arjun and go find the bag, basically the bag that they found way back as kids under the piano, and escape. Now remember this little detail, it's very important for the next episode. Then we see that the university decides to give up Jade, and she agrees, she goes willingly, and Arjun doesn't even attempt to stop her. Again, he's just fucking useless. Why the hell is Jade with him again? We're never given any real reason, they have no chemistry, but I know I'm expecting way too much from a Netflix show. And then we see that Bee finds the bag and the gun inside. Now we get to the massive plot twist of the episode and whole series, which you probably could have guessed at the beginning of this episode once you found out that Billy planted the tracker in the zombie queen, but I don't think you would have guessed the other major part of this scene. So Jade walks into the tent alone, sees Evelyn, then this absolutely ridiculous dance number breaks out.
Thinking about the way I was that the heartbreak changed me.
And words cannot describe how stupid and out of left field this whole thing was. It is just so bizarre. It doesn't help that the actress Paula Nunez, she has such a cartoonish looking face with exaggerated features that the goofiness factor just goes to 11. I already wasn't taking anything seriously in this show anymore, but just wow. And of course, the whole point of this was to display that Umbrella perfected their mind control technology and Billy was the real bad guy all along. Because of course it's gotta come down to sister drama. One's good, one's evil. You know, peak soap opera bullshit. I'm seriously starting to wonder if there's even a single talented writer working for Netflix at this point. And this may be hard to believe, but it actually gets worse than this. Because then Billy decides to explain her motivation for this entire thing, and it is the most pathetic, juvenile reason to take out the university. As we've been told before, I don't know if I forgot to mention it in a video or not, but the whole point of the university is to preserve the history of mankind, right? It's basically a library on a boat. And so Billy wants to destroy the university because, I am shitting you not, her past was bad. Her childhood was traumatic, as we've seen in these past scenes. And so all the past is awful, and we need to trudge forward to a new future. Listen, I know I've said this a few times by now, but I don't think I even need to explain why this is retarded. It just doesn't even make sense conceptually, and again, it just makes Billy look like a giant fucking baby. She's 28 years old at this point, running the only surviving mega corporation in the apocalypse, or at least that's what it seems like we're led to believe, that is more powerful than governments, and it's led by a goddamn adult child. And people are probably going to call me a misogynist for this, but as soon as I heard her explain her reasoning, I'm like, oh, a woman totally wrote this shit. And guess what? I was right. The writer for this episode is Mary Leah Sutton. I don't need to drag out this review any longer than it likely will already be, so let's just move on. So we also learn that the reason that Jade is so important is not because Billy still loves her sister. No, it's because she did tell the truth about still being infected, and she needs Jade's blood to keep the T-virus from turning her into a zombie. And this is supposed to parallel how Wesker needed his children, them, to cure him. The problem is, it doesn't really make any sense here. If Billy's antibodies can't fight off the T-virus, why would Jade's be any better? But given everything else we've seen in this show by this point, I'm just nitpicking, whatever, doesn't matter. And so Jade, of course, doesn't want to go along with any of this shit, so she takes the nuclear option, and it turns out she brought with her the enzyme that attracts zombies. And despite the fact that the repel enzyme was only strong enough to make the zombie ignore her, it didn't actively push it away. The attract enzyme is insanely powerful, drawing in every zombie probably in a 5-mile radius, as you're about to see here. And so when she smashes the vial, a crazy amount of zombies come out of the woodwork from every direction and start assaulting this little camp. And honestly, this brings an important question. For some reason, the university is docked on the beach, but they have lifeboats. Why would they take the whole ship? And so Jade has once again endangered her family's lives. But again, the writers have clearly not put any thought into any of this, so I don't know why I am. And speaking of the university, it starts to sail off in the middle of the chaos, and we see that they have a giant crocodile attached to the boat, obviously a Resident Evil 2 reference. And if you're thinking this doesn't make any sense, they do have a justification for it that honestly is stupid, but we'll get into that next episode. And so the episode ends with the zombies starting to overrun the camp, and at the same time in the past, the girls are sitting in Umbrella's lobby, and we see that the drug that Evelyn gave to her wife is joy, which you obviously would have guessed already. So yeah, this episode sucked, but was honestly just about average for this show. The plot twist with Billy was really stupid, but the dance number is kind of funny in a schlocky way, I guess. It doesn't quite make up for it. But honestly, I really shouldn't be surprised by how bad the villain motivation is given everything else I've seen from this show, but holy shit, man. What a childish reason to want to basically end humanity. At least the past plot was somewhat tolerable. Again, the Burt scenes were great. Lance Reddick remains one of the only somewhat decent parts about this show. And at least they had an explanation as to why he's never acted like the real Albert Wesker in the entire show. So yeah, I don't know, we'll give the episode a 4 out of 10. And so now we finally get to the final episode of the series, and man, what an anticlimax it is. So episode 8 begins in 2030, which is 6 years before the events of the future timeline. And it basically explains the giant crocodile by showing that Jade invents a way to keep T-virus animals asleep, and I guess somehow they captured a giant crocodile and sedated it with this shit. I can't even drudge up the energy to get mad about this. I don't even care anymore. They have a giant crocodile, okay? Then back in the present future, the zombies overrun the camp, killing a bunch of the Umbrella soldiers. Billy smacks the shit out of Jade, which again is pretty cathartic after everything we've seen. She really deserves it. And she heads back inside the tent. And what's kind of interesting here is that they imply that despite being mind-controlled, Evelyn still is conscious of everything that's going on and says that Billy still needs her, and it's implied that Billy leaves her behind. But we're never shown her death, so I'm assuming she survives this somehow. Then we see that Billy is carving a path through all the zombies by using 4 drones to gun them all down, and Jade escapes out the back, which I guess none of the other Umbrella troops were smart enough to try, and she somehow gets past a shit ton of zombies with just a trash can lid, which you're probably thinking, oh, the zombies are ignoring her because they're going toward the enzyme, but we see the zombies go out of their way to kill several of the Umbrella troops, so no, this is just more plot armor bullshit. Then Arjun helps her back on board the university, and she convinces Sakim to unleash the crocodile, because yes, that's what the button they were referring to earlier is. And apparently it takes 2 people to activate this thing. It's really dramatized. Then when it cuts back to Billy, we see that the drones have successfully killed all the zombies, but then the giant crocodile shows up to eat Billy. Why does it stop at Billy and not go toward the enzyme? I don't know, who cares? And then we get to the first absolutely idiotic part of this episode, where we see that Bee, who I believe is 10 years old, decides to leave with the bag by herself. Nobody stopped this little girl, and she was supposed to grab Arjun, so she's too stupid to even listen to instructions. Some child prodigy over here. Then it cuts back to the giant crocodile rampaging around. The CGI obviously looks pretty rough here, but that's the least of my complaints at the moment. Somehow the crocodile blows up the drones because they're stupid enough to fly near it, I guess. And then, of course, Billy scares it away by throwing 1 grenade at it. It didn't even land in its mouth. Just a grenade exploded near it, and the crocodile ran away into the ocean. And as it's rolling away, a fucking helicopter flies directly above its tail and gets smacked out of the air. I mean, really, man? Really? And so, since the crocodile swam back into the ocean, Jade and Arjun just happen to row the boat right near its tail, which capsizes the thing for maximum drama. And so in the next scene, we see that the crocodile has decided to come back to land and try and kill Billy again for some reason, even though they're nowhere near the enzyme at this point. But of course, Billy escapes in a helicopter in time, and so it turns out B just happens to be nearby, so the crocodile turns toward B, sniffs her, stares directly at her, and then doesn't eat her, which is supposed to be obviously implying she's been genetically modified. Because despite Jade claiming that she hates her dad and everything he did was horrible, she's a goddamn hypocrite and did all the same shit that Wesker did. Now, the problem I have with this is, why does it work on T-virus animals but not zombies? What's the distinction there? The zombie that escaped the last episode still tried to eat her. Do you think they explain that? No, they don't. And as we cut back to Jade and Arjun, turns out it just so happens Arjun injured his leg, so Jade has to go alone to save her daughter. Wow, that doesn't feel forced at all, Netflix, thanks. Then we see that Billy's helicopter fires missiles at the croc, which actually kills it. You don't usually see that in giant monster shows or movies, so I'll give the show a little bit of credit there. And then when Jade catches up to B, Billy lands the helicopter and shows up to take her. I guess Billy has decided that maybe B's blood would be just as good as Jade's blood. I don't know why the fuck she would take that chance, because I thought we were just told that she needs her sister's blood to not turn into a zombie. Okay, whatever. Obviously, the fucking writers didn't give a shit. I need to stop giving a shit. The point is, we get an extremely melodramatic scene, again, straight out of a soap opera, where Billy explains that the T-virus removed her humanity, which, the way she says it, more like it just takes away all her human restrictions. And Jade has an opportunity to shoot her sister, but she just can't bring herself to do it, so she ugly cries, and no, it's not very convincing. And so Billy shoots her instead, and then takes her daughter. And the cliffhanger here is she gonna finish her off? Which of course she's not gonna finish her off. We already knew they wanted multiple seasons for the show, and Jade is the main fucking character. So for whatever reason, Billy spares her sister, because she has a tiny bit of humanity left. Such a fucking tired cliche. It would be okay if any of the characters were likable, but they're not. So cliches are just worse when the writing is this bad, the characters are this bad, the plot's this bad, etc. And the future plot ends with, of course, Jade surviving and watching the helicopter fly away in the distance, and she gives a meanie stare to show how she wants revenge and she's gonna take this seriously now, or something. I don't know. But of course, since we've had 2 timelines running the entire show, we still have the past climax to go through. And if you're wondering if that was good at least, no, honestly, it might have been worse. The past plot begins with the girls being taken home with the bodyguard guy, and he tells them to pack up their shit in 5 minutes. Jade threatens to scream, and the henchman guy dares her to do it, cause yeah, no shit, Umbrella owns this whole city. Again, we are constantly told the girls are like child prodigy geniuses. They have never once done something intelligent. And so instead of actually packing their shit, they decide to have another drama scene where they talk about what just happened. Because again, this is a fucking TV show, so they have to stretch it out, so there's so many unnecessary scenes. We already know how they feel about it, stop wasting our fucking time. Meanwhile, Evelyn is emotionally manipulating Bert, offering him a home and access to his new family in exchange for working on a new Tyrant project. Now here's the very obvious problem with this. We've been told this entire time this is supposed to fit into the Resident Evil plotline. At the very least, we know the original trilogy and at least Resident Evil 5 are canon. So why does Bert need to work on the Tyrant project? There's already like 5 or 6 different variants of the Tyrant out at this point. Mr. X is already basically a step beyond this OG Tyrant model they're showing here, so I have no idea what they're going for. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but again, it seems like they want it to be canon with all these references, but they don't actually know anything about Resident Evil outside of some like fucking Wikipedia searches. But once again, I'm wasting time with a tangent. Back to the plot. And so Jade distracts the henchman guy with the chihuahua, basically saying he's super high maintenance. And meanwhile, Billy grabs the bag, and the girls leap out the window. Of course, the henchman knew that they were going to try and escape, so he's waiting for them. And they try to run, but Billy freezes up for some reason when she gets yelled at, and then somehow uses the T-virus in her bloodstream to turn into a fucking super zombie mode. They don't explain this shit at all. Again, if you're wondering, it's just a thing that she can do. And this distracts the guy long enough for Jade to escape. And so in the next scene, we see Billy's captured and talking to Evelyn, and she tries to convince Billy to join Team Evil, basically. And so, of course, there's a bunch of random F-bombs in this scene. I know I curse a lot in these videos, especially because they piss me off. But this just feels gratuitous, especially because these are 14-year-old girls constantly cursing like this. I don't know, it's just kind of cringy to me. And so then we see that Jade arrives at the hacker simp's house and tells him the whole crazy story about the clones and shit. And of course he mentions that his mom has been given the super joy, and it's causing her to basically malfunction like a robot. She cooks dinner twice, and then she cuts herself and doesn't feel anything, which I guess is pretty much what Joy was advertised to do. And so, Hacker Simp calls his mom and confronts her about drugging his other mom. And then Evelyn gives a sob story and references Resident Evil 0 by talking about basically how Spencer took Umbrella from James Marcus, if I remember correctly. And then yet another character says "fuck you" to their parent. I'm noticing a lot of that in this show. And so, Simp and Jade arrive at the building. He hacks in and buys them 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Billy is having a seizure from an adrenaline shot that she was given by some scientist, and then she fucking overpowers him and stabs him in the eye with the syringe, and then slashes Evelyn across the face with it, which explains the scar she has in the future scenes. Then as she escapes from that room, Bert shows up, and he gives a speech about how, despite all the things that he did to his daughters, which honestly wasn't that fucking bad in the grand scheme of things, Albert loves his kids and tried his best despite making a lot of mistakes. And so, Billy is actually convinced by this and decides to rescue him. But Jade and Simp find Albert first. Jade is once again a bitch to her father, and he just fucking takes it, just doesn't even say anything. But before they leave, Bert and Billy show up and convince Jade to let Albert come along. And I want to point out something that you may have noticed by now. Just like the very first episode, Umbrella has no fucking security. None at all. The building was basically fucking empty except for Evelyn and one scientist. It is so fucking dumb, man. The CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company has no fucking security outside of an easily hackable system that her fucking son could get into, but you don't think you should invest in any fucking security. Dude, I hate this show so much. It really thinks the audience is stupid. And honestly, I'm watching this shit, so maybe I am stupid, I don't know. Anyway, the alarm finally goes off and the building locks down. And so, in the next scene, the kids are told to hide in a side room. Billy starts hallucinating again and bites Simp. The show is so fucking stupid. I need help, man. I don't want to watch these shitty shows anymore. And so, they just give themselves up. Seriously, all the heroes give themselves up when the Umbrella security forces show up with Evelyn. Albert then immediately offers to find a cure for Simp, and then Evelyn shoots her own son in the face. But not Billy. No, shoots her son. And then, as if it couldn't get any more fucking dumb, then both Weskers start shooting all the security forces, but they don't shoot Evelyn. Seriously, they fucking leave Evelyn, the goddamn main villain, at least in the past. They could end the entire fucking show, but of course we've seen the future happen. She's alive in the future, so she can't die here. Well, maybe you should have wrote a better fucking scenario, you goddamn idiots. Dude, this is killing me. This is exactly like the Halo finale, when Master Chief wouldn't shoot the Prophets. It's the same thing. Do they get the same fucking writers for these shows? Who the hell are these hacks? And the fact that they don't shoot her is extremely important for the next scene, because the four make their way into some side lab by the main floor or something, and then both the Weskers decide to set up a makeshift bomb to blow up the entire building. Albert decides he's gonna sacrifice himself and just leave his children with this fucking maniac clone. Again, father of the year. What the hell, man? Why is every parent character in this show a piece of shit? Anyway, his reason is that Bert never had a chance to live, so he basically wants to give him a life, and he says goodbye to his daughters and hands them a note to contact someone once they escape. Then after they get away, Evelyn shows up and shoots the lighter out of Wesker's hand. Then she shoots him in the leg, and before finishing him, she has to do a villain monologue, and then they do a fucking Marvel tier back and forth quip. And so Wesker lights the gas trail with his pen, causing a huge explosion that blows up the whole building, and Evelyn is like 5 fucking feet away from it, and she lives. The amount of fucking plot armor that the women have in this show, holy shit. This is a real TV show that probably had millions of dollars behind it. I know Halo had like $10 million an episode, so this must have had at least 1 or 2 million. People got paid to make this. And so we get to the final scene of the first season, where past Jade doesn't trust Billy anymore after she's gone psycho and killed her boyfriend, basically. And as Bert drives them outside of the city, Jade sees that the contact is Ada Wong. Yes, they're actually going to drag main characters into this other than Wesker, because what else is going to bring people back to watch season 2? Then we see Evelyn being carried out of what's left of the building, and the tyrant's arm bursts out of the rubble. And that's the end of the final episode. I hate this show so much. This is legitimately the worst video game adaptation I've ever seen. I know I've already said that in the other 2 videos, but it's true. It's not even an adaptation. It's Resident Evil in name only. It has a handful of references, some of which don't even make sense. And the attempt to connect it to the Resident Evil timeline is completely fucking pointless, because it's not like the show's canon. It will never be canon. And no fan of Resident Evil likes this show. Even the biggest shills for Resident Evil don't like this show. That should tell you something. And so, I guess, final thoughts on the show. I'll start with the good, because it's a very short list. Lance Reddick is a good actor, but that's about as far as it goes. Wesker is not black. Blackwashing any character is bad, and the only times that Hollywood has gotten away with it is when people don't know the source material. It doesn't mean you can't be a good actor and play the role to your best, and this idea of a clone Wesker who's just trying to be a normal human being and have a family is fine. Honestly, my biggest problem with it had nothing to do with Wesker himself, but his children. Jade and Billy are absolutely insufferable. Jade especially is just fucking unlikable. I understand that Netflix wants to push all this female protagonist shit, that's fine, okay? What's not fine is when you basically say fuck you to all the men watching the show. And yeah, I really can't say anything else good about the show. No, I don't think the references are good just because the references, sorry. The liquor scene was alright. And then the scene with the fat umbrella guy, who of course they kill immediately after this, but the scene where he kills like 40 zombies, that was actually a pretty decent action scene. But it's also probably the only decent action scene, period, in the entire season. As for all the bad things of the show, I'll try to sum it up briefly, because almost everything about the show is bad. Basically, the plot is bad, the characters are bad, the CGI is bad, a lot of the props are bad, the sci-fi armor that the Umbrella soldiers use in the future just looks fucking stupid and makes no sense because they have the hunk armor in the past scenes. Why not just use that for the future? It's only 14 years, guys. It's not exactly like Halo 500 years futuristic tech. And doesn't even matter if I say anything else is bad. If I don't like your characters and I don't like your plot, there's literally no other reason to watch the show. I don't care how good your cinematography is, or how much effort you would put into practical effects, which of course neither is true of this show. I'm just saying, if your plot and characters are bad, your show sucks, period. And honestly, I'm just tired of talking about this show. I'm glad I only did 3 episodes of this, but honestly, even that was too much. I think you all got the point, and I'll repeat what I said at the end of the first episode: cancel your fucking Netflix subscription. Seriously, don't give these fucks money. You're just supporting the woke agenda bullshit. As for what I'm planning to do next on the channel, not really sure. Maybe I'll actually review a Resident Evil game, I don't know. But thanks for watching. Do the things the algorithm likes if you haven't already. Thank you to my patrons, and that's about it. I'll see you next time, guys.